Hey, what I wanted to do was talk a little bit about what I'm looking for on these weekend assignments and really how I would sort of go about reviewing a project. I mean, look, ideally, I think what, would be great is if I set up the project and went through it and ran it, but, you have I have limited bandwidth to be able to do that. And frankly, there's a lot that I could find out just by going in and looking at what the structure is of the project. I mean, one thing that I see here right off the bat. So this is a project from a student. I've set up my own branch for it. One of the things that I see is that the node modules folder is included here. I ended up getting this, I think, even prior to doing my npm install. So that would be something that maybe I would end up taking a look at. You want to make sure, and let's just take a look. If I end up, let's do a, yeah, so there, I have a feeling that there could be something that's wrong with this git ignore because, again, it felt like this folder was here. So you just want to make sure that when you end up uploading something to GitHub, that your node modules folder is not there. This is going to really bloat your repo, and you just don't need it. I'm going to open this up in Vim and start taking a look at it. And the first thing that I usually look at is the models. And I'm really looking for models that are going to be fairly clean. I mean, here, this is fine. I mean, I've been doing this, putting all my models in one file. At some point, we should probably pull some of this out. Here, we're using some, I can see we're using some ES6 stuff here. So if I go to take a look at this, I would give myself a little bit of room here. Here, we're bringing in Sequelize. This is one thing that I don't think I would do. I don't think that I would necessarily authenticate to the database. I think you might want to have a way to authenticate to the database if you're, as a method to see whether or not you can connect or not. But I don't think I would just automatically connect to the database when this ends up loading. This just seems like it doesn't make a lot of sense here. Probably is not being used. It doesn't really serve much of a purpose. Yeah, you'll get an exception, but if you really wanted to do that, I think you would probably want to do that in your server file to see whether or not you could authenticate. In which case, if you did really want to have something like this, what you could do is do this, and in which case, you could come down here, and you don't need the catch here. Again, assume that whatever the calling code is going to end up, catching these errors here. And here you'd want to, I think, frankly, I would just do this. So that if someone was using this code, you could find out whether or not you can authenticate to the database. Let's just see, we've also got our sync. Let's see what that does. We see a lot of missing semicolons here too. I like to go in here and get rid of these errors little by little. Here I can see it looks like the relationships are pretty good. This is fine. This is doing db.sync. I would think that if you were syncing, you'd want to do a force if true to make sure that the tables ended up getting created. Now, I'll take a look and see where this is used. So these are all things that I'm, sort of looking for here. So there's a lot that's going on in this file, probably a lot more than there needs to be. This is fine. This is something that, we're defining the model correctly, which is okay. What I don't understand when I look at this is that this whole idea of adding a salesperson. The find or create bothers me because, look, if you want to put a restriction on, the salesperson, and you don't want to have, duplicate names for the salespeople, that's fine. But that's a constraint that I think you should end up putting up here. And I think if someone goes and tries to create a salesperson and that salesperson's name ends up, exists, don't let them think that they created a salesperson, which they wouldn't have done because this is find or create. Throw an exception and say, I'm sorry, that salesperson's name already exists. Again, assuming that you wanted that to be unique constraint. So for me, I do feel like this add salesperson is really kind of muddying up our model. Same token here. We've got another class method for list salespeople. Now, all this is doing a find.all. This doesn't seem like I'm getting that much out of doing, and if I do a find all and I don't put anything in here, this will work just as well. So list salesperson doesn't seem to buy me all that much. So in which case, I don't really have any class methods here. I could end up getting rid of this, in which case I could probably get rid of this as well, right? So that's going to make this a little bit easier to read. So here we're putting a restriction on the zip code. That's fine. Assuming that this works. I don't think I've worked with this validation, but I'm assuming that we're doing a 5-digit zip code and a possible 4 digits afterwards. I see the same thing with adding a region. I don't like the find or create. If you're not going to allow duplicates with regions, then just don't allow it. So I'm going to take out this method. And again, it's the same thing with the list regions as well. So again, this comes out. Now again, I'm sure we're calling these methods somewhere, and I'll take a look and see where we do that. But you can see now these two classes are a little bit simpler here. So now we've got the salesperson region. Here, adding a salesperson, again, I don't really have again, if there's a restriction here, I don't really want to do the find or create. Create is just fine by passing in a sales ID and a region ID. And this also, if you were doing this, the naming here is not right? This should be salesperson ID because that's what this is, not a sales ID. We don't really have a definition of what a sales ID is. So I would pull this out. Again, salesperson region doesn't make all that much sense either, and let's do this here. So again, one of the things that you'll find with the branches that I do, again, I'm getting rid of all this code. Sometimes I comment out this code when I get rid of it, but this is the kind of stuff that I'm looking at. Here, I'm just not sure what's going on. I assume here what I'm doing is that I'm finding out if a salesperson has a particular region. And my guess is that there's probably a better way to do it. And more than likely, the way to do this, so here maybe I'll write a comment out here. And I think really what we want here is some kind of instance method, okay? Want an instance method which will find out, and actually maybe I'm incorrect about this. I think probably more to the point is that I think what you're trying to find out here, I think you want instance methods on salesperson and region, right? And I think what you want to be able to do is with a salesperson, find out if they have a particular region, and with a region, find out if they have a particular salesperson. So I think that there's probably a better way than doing this. And this just doesn't read all that well to me. My guess is when I look at this, I think you probably would want to use reduce here because it looks like you're just returning one value. So but again, I end up coming at these things from the salesperson or the region as opposed to going in and putting in some class method on the salesperson region where you're passing in, this array with these two values. And again, right, this would probably be salesperson. And if you had this code, you really want to give yourself a little bit of room to breathe over here. Again, remove. What does it really buy you? You could call destroy with a where clause. Doesn't buy me all that much to put that in. So here, I mean, the comment would be, and we'll see where this code ends up getting used. So, again, a big chunk of it, the models look correct in terms of the data that they have. This is nice that I see environment variable for Sequelize. That's nice. That'll work well for deploying. I also like how the relationships are set up, right? A salesperson region belongs to a salesperson, also to a region. A salesperson region has many salesperson regions. That looks good. I do feel like I'm missing a relationship here. So salesperson region belongs to a region. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe that's totally fine. Yeah, so this is basically defining your has many relationships, and that's more than what you need here. Okay, so next thing I would look at, start to take a look at the routes. So if I end up looking at the routes here, there's a couple of things that I know. One of the things that if I start out with regions, I know in the end what I really want to get is I know I want to loop over my regions, okay? I want to loop over my regions, and within that loop, I want to loop over my salespeople. So instead of doing this way, I think what I would do, and I'll comment this because I think that this is what we need. We've got all these methods here, which I ended up removing most of these. And I think what I would do is real simply make sure that I have my salesperson region here as a model. And I think the way that I would do it is I would say, hey, region, I want to find all of you. And I want you to include the salesperson regions that you have. Okay? So this way, I'm going to have this property set up when I loop over the regions, and I'm going to be able to see all these salesperson regions. So there's only two things that I need for these views. One of them is the regions. The other one is I need to get all these salespeople. So salesperson, find all. With these two things, I should be able to go in here, and I've got my salespeople. Excuse me, I've got my regions. I've got my salespeople. And what I should be able to do, again, there's a little bit too much that I think is going on here. I'm going to render the regions. And I think I would kind of break it up a little bit. Again, give yourself some room to maneuver here so that this reads a little bit better. And I would just pass back the regions, salespeople, and that should be lowercase, so I'll fix that. That's enough to really, I know that that's enough to generate your UI. If I go to post, again, we don't need the add region, we're going to do create. If there's an error, we could deal with the error. Again, let's call this what it is. This is a region we're getting back. All right? And we can end up just redirecting back to region. So again, we want to name things correctly. Again, give yourself a little bit of room to work here. Again, notice this route is fairly clean. Let's take this out. We've got our find all with our include. All right? And just to do a note, all you need are the regions, right, with salespeople region and the salespeople. That's going to be enough to get you to be able to output this. Delete, there's no reason why we can't have the delete here. And when we go to delete, let's just call this what it is. This is just the ID, right? And again, give ourselves some room to work. Now, I also see a lot of people putting this here, okay? You only need this once. This doesn't have to be per route. This is for your, put it in your main app file. And this way, because you always want to do the same thing if you have an error. You don't want to, you basically want to just sort of recover from the error. And you also probably want to do something more than console.log because you don't necessarily want the user to just be sitting there. You want to output or at least show what your error is. So I'm going to take this out here. And when we want to delete, does it look like I have an extra something or other here? No, that's not right. So this is here. That's here. When we want to delete, let's just say region.destroy. There's nothing wrong with putting this here where ID request params ID. And we'll do a then function, and we got rid of a region, and we're going to do response.redirect, and we'll go back to regions. Now, if you wanted to, you can destroy the salesperson regions before you end up doing this, in which case, it would look more like this, salesperson region dot destroy. And so this is going to be aware, and this is going to be where region ID is equal to request params.id. And again, this is going to be one after the other. And maybe you have to do this because you have there's sort of a parent-child relationship here. And again, when I do this and I decide to nest this, I'll go back. This is my next promise in the promise chain. So first I'm deleting all the salesperson regions. Make sure I've got my semicolons here. And I don't want a semicolon there. And I'll be redirecting to regions. And let's see if we have, this is another issue here. You want to keep these singular, right? This is going to be region, not regions. So I'd like to see if I have a syntax error, I'd like to try to catch it. So this is rendering the regions. Let's just see what it doesn't like here. Salespeople, and I'm missing a colon here. Again, it's nice to have a linter, see those things go away, and let's make sure, again, these are singular. Your models are singular. Semicolon over here. And, the thing that I'm least concerned about are the views. I know if the data is there, you can actually, get your view to do what you want it to do. And that's something that we can end up taking a look at. And my guess is I'm going to see sort of a similar thing here, which is, again, I just want to do the flip here. So the flip here is, again, if we're doing a get, this is going to be region. And if we end up doing a get, we're also going to need our salesperson region because we're going to want to include it. In which case, we're going to do a promise.all, and we're going to have two promises. One of them is going to get all. So now we're coming in from the opposite direction. So this is going to be salesperson, find all, include salesperson region. And we're going to do region, not regions, but region find all. Again, we're going to be looping over the salesperson. We'll have the salesperson's regions, and then we can have some method that figures out whether or not, and let's do a spread here. do something that figures out whether or not that salesperson has that region. So this is going to be salespeople. This is going to be regions. Response.render. And this is going to be salespeople, a salespeople view. Salespeople is salespeople. Regions is regions. Probably if we're doing tabs or something, we probably want to have something that showed what those tabs are. Again, post, similar thing, right? But salesperson, just use create. In which case, you're going to need to do name. Again, sometimes there's a reason, but I didn't like that find or create class method. And again, call it what it is. Salesperson. Right, we're doing the catch with the next. That makes sense. And again, we don't need this more than once. And if we had it, we wouldn't want to just lock the user up here. And let's see, we're going to miss some semicolons here. See what else. We're probably missing another couple of things here. Comma here. And we're getting some of these errors to go away. It says we're missing a next, so we want to make sure that we end up using that. Next, catch, next. All right, you want to name things accordingly. And salesperson is defined, never used. That's true. That I'm a little bit less concerned about. And one thing that sort of struck me here, I might have made a mistake, is that when we create a region, we need to specify that this is the zip. Or zip code, or whatever you called it. Again, this is not necessarily going to work, but this is kind of what these routes should look like. Nice, RESTful routes. We don't really have any editing that's going on here. Once we end up getting that, the salesperson regions, here's a post. Sales ID, and again, let's call it what it is, salesperson ID. And we've got a salesperson region, so we don't have to use models. In fact, that's why it's showing that this is not being used here. Again, give ourselves a little bit of room to breathe. And here, this is going to be just salesperson region, and we're just going to call it create. If you wanted to have some other logic here, you could, but we're going to say that our UI is going to prevent this from being duplicated. And if not, if for some reason, we put a constraint on this so that you couldn't end up creating the same, again, we'll call it a territory, which is probably what these things are. And this is, let's call it what it is, salesperson ID. Salesperson ID. Region ID, and then we've got a then, and we're going to redirect. I don't know what this redirecting to request.body.name is. So I think here, the way that I dealt with this was to basically do a redirect or a back to, and we'll say request.query back to. So we're going to you want to add this, make sure it gets passed in here. Because again, this route ends up getting used for a couple of different things here. So we've got our regions. Again, let's call it region. Frankly, I don't think we need, right? Don't bring in things that you don't need. You need the salesperson region. You don't need that. You don't need that. Doesn't look like we're doing any spreading here, so you don't need the Bluebird promise library. But here, the same way we did a create here, this is just the flip side of the create. Again, we don't want to put this here. This is going to go in our main app file. And this is going to be a delete, so this is going to be a destroy. And we could just put a where here. And put another one over here and move these things over. Right, so that ends up lining up. So here's our where clause. This is our object that we're passing back. We're destroying where these things are true. Again, not sales ID, salesperson. Let me make sure I made that change up here too, which I think I did. All right, once we end up doing that, and again, give yourself some room to work. So again, we want to have those routes be nice and tight here. And once we have that, then I think the next thing I would do, again, I always look in the views last. Looking at the app file, all this stuff looks good. Method override, extended is false. We've got our static path, that's fine. We end up rendering the index. We end up requiring these routes. You don't need the .js here. I think I would probably take that out. And other than that, that looks pretty good. This is a pretty nice file. It's nice and tight. You can see it's pretty short. Things have been set up pretty well here. If we end up looking at our, and actually one thing that I would add here, this is where I would end up putting in app.use, function, error, request, response, next. And here I would say console log error. And then just for starters, maybe just try to send the error. I don't know, you might not get back too much with that error because I think when you do this, it turns it into a JSON object. And I think those error properties aren't really iterable. So I would do a check here. Or possibly, have an error page where you end up rendering the error page with the error on it. But you want to send something back. And you only need to have this once. The other thing that I would probably do here, again, let's just give yourself nice room to work. And so if I looked at that, I think the next thing I would do is look at the server. Here's where we're using DB. We're calling sync. Right, the tables are created. This is fine because maybe your app doesn't start. I think what I would probably do here is say something like if process environment sync, then sync. Because again, you're going to want to put this up on production. You don't want it to sync every time. I know I modified the sync file so that it is actually recreating the tables, but this is probably makes sense to do. So you have an environment variable for this. This looks totally fine. Here's our server. It's using our app file. All that looks great. Again, not all that much going on. So, a lot of tightening of the models and the routes. Looking at this, we've got our layout page here. Maybe I would put something in here. To show what page you're on by passing some value. Here's our content block, that's fine. Even here, indent. Right? Let it read a little bit better. Even the body, right? The head and the body come in from the HTML. And I think here is where, I'm probably not going to be able to do all that much, but again, when we're in regions, there's a lot of stuff that's going on here. I think the key here is to do something like this. Here we are populating our region, and our region has our salesperson regions. So I think what I would, as a starting point here, I'm mapping over the salespeople. I think I would do something like region has salesperson, and pass in the salesperson ID. So this is a method that I would probably, to do. add an instance method to regions. So that a region has the ability, again, let's assume that its salesperson regions are populated, which they're not here. This will end up throwing an error, and that's okay. And then it's a lot easier to go in and do this logic here. There's a lot less that you have to pass back here. Here we've got this method delete. I think here is where I would also pass back, back to regions, right? And here, and this could probably be trimmed down a little bit. Same thing here. You don't need a method override there. Back to regions. Maybe some indenting would help too. But overall, that's actually not bad. Again, my biggest takeaway is that the model could just be a lot, what you end up sending back to the view could be a lot simpler, so you don't need all this stuff that's here. And in here, you could just say if region has salesperson. And pass in the salesperson ID. Other than that, the two loops make total sense. It's the same thing with the salespeople. So here, you're going to be looping over your salespeople, right? And you will have populated their regions. So again, as you go in here and loop over the regions, and again, I would probably, try to indent a little bit here. You might want to pull things out into a, so here's your for loop, right? Just so this reads a little bit better. And again, instead of going in here and saying if matched, again, you're going to have some method on the salesperson. If salesperson has region, and this time it's the region ID, then you're going to want to end up having two different forms. And again, here, back to, and this is going to go back to salespeople. Again, I don't know what this is going to necessarily look like when it gets rendered. But again, one thing here, you might want to dry this out. Again, maybe make, what's it called, an include, where you pass some values in, because this stuff looks really a lot like this stuff. The only exception is really the putting method as delete here. So, we could go over here and specify that this is going to be, and back to, I actually see what's going on here. I see you're passing this value as salespeople, but that's probably not the place for it. I think that instead of, so I see what was happening here. You have this idea of a name, which is going to tell you where you're going back to. I would do it as a URL value. I think it's just a little bit easier to do here. So in which case, you're usually not going to have a name on a button. Doesn't really make all that much sense. And when you're figuring out where you're going to go back, instead of doing this, again, I would do it a back to on the URL. You can do a hidden field too, but I just think that think about hidden fields as being data, and here this is just telling us really where we want to go back to. Other than that, that would be what my critique would be for this, in which case, I would end up doing a get.add. And I would end up pushing it. But yeah, I think hopefully that gives you a good idea of, I think, how stuff could get cleaned up. Again, more simple models, more simple routes. And if the routes are pretty simple and the models are simple, the views should also get simplified a little bit. All right, that's really about it.